Hi, I'm Cheryl McElroy, the Communications Director for the Town of Speedway. To provide continued awareness and understanding of the proposed water and sewer rate increase, today I'm speaking with Town Manager Grant Kleinhenz and Clerk Treasurer Jacob Blasdel.
Hello.
Hi, gentlemen.
Hi.
Grant, let's start with you. Would you mind giving us just a snapshot or an overview of what's happening?
Yeah, so the Town Council considered an ordinance on first reading nearly a month ago that proposed to increase our sewer and water rates. The reason for that is we are having to keep up with new and emerging issues, also maintaining our facilities. They're old, updating them, making sure that they're working properly, and also being proactive about maintenance. So that was the reason that we're moving this forward. No one wants to raise sewer and water rates. It really is a condition of need.
Okay. How much do you anticipate the rate increase being?
So overall, the sewer and water rate increase together is about a 37% increase. And I will say this, I think we discussed early on ways to reduce that. I know the Town Council wanted us to look at different options. We worked to remove some projects or move some things around to kind of settle on that final 37% increase. So what that means in numbers is the average user, we always say an average user is someone who uses about 4,000 gallons of water per month, will see a $14.30 increase per month. About $5 of that, give or take, is for our sewer rate. The other remaining $9 and change is for the water rate.
When was the last rate increase and why now?
Yeah, so it's been a while. It's been since 2011, so that's 11 years. And anytime you look at the maintenance and upkeep of a system, those costs increase. So, you know, the cost of pipe, the cost of fuel, natural gas, employment costs, insurance, those types of things have all increased over the past decade. And in order to keep up with that, as well as be proactive to try to address some concerns with the facilities, we're having to do that rate increase at this time.
Jacob, can you tell us how the town decided what improvements to make as priority?
Yeah, so it started with our superintendents at water and sewer and kind of understanding where they felt the priorities were and the things that they were seeing. And then we also engaged Wessler Engineering to help with that process, to look at kind of the list that our superintendents had, but also they're very familiar with, Wessler Engineering is familiar with both our sewer and water plants, as well as the distribution and collection system. So also engaging things that they felt, looking at our equipment, what is the useful life, how much more should we expect, you know, where maybe we, you know, investing dollars in aging equipment that no longer makes sense, and working with them to kind of evaluate where are all of our priorities and really kind of what order should things be put in to make sure that you're getting to the high priority items first, but also not doing work on something that then you would maybe potentially have to undo, or maybe just didn't make sense to do that part first, to make sure that we're not wasting dollars into bad investments.
Okay. Grant, can you tell us maybe what specific improvements are planned for each water and wastewater?
Sure. So the water plant was built in 1964, so it is 50 years plus old. There's a lot of different items to address, so I'm going to go ahead and read some of those from my list here. We're going to update our existing well system, also look for the creation of some new wells. We rely mostly on groundwater, although we do have a raw water intake on Little Eagle Creek, and we get some water from there, but it's always important to make sure we have wells that are upkept, they're producing well, and then also looking for new sources of water. Water is something that we can't necessarily create. It's important that we capture that and then use that for the future. Another item, we have a low head dam that's near our raw water intake on the creek. That needs to be upgraded and improved. We're also looking at some changes in chemical processes, changing out things like pumps and other piping inside the plant. Once again, 1964, that's a long time to have a lot of those items. Some of those pumps no longer made, parts are no longer made, and it sometimes can be very challenging to find any vendor that is able to work on those items. Another big part of the water improvements is a focus on security. We have a raw water intake there that I've already mentioned. You know, we're going to put a cover over that to protect it, to also be able to work inside of that to potentially be able to use that longer throughout the year. Typically now we shut that down near the end of the year and don't start it back up until around March. If we can get some of this protective equipment there, we can use that longer, and I think that's better for our system. You got to remember, water is hard when it comes out of the ground. Surface water isn't as hard, and that hard water can be very hard on appliances, piping, etc. So that's on the water side. On the wastewater side, the wastewater plant was built in 1954, so it's even older. There have been upgrades over the years, but just making sure to keep up with that. Very similar items, some process changes, as well as some electrical and safety updates. Many people don't realize this, but we do have about 4,000 customers that live outside the corporate limits of the Town of Speedway. We have a major lift station that will provide sewer collection and then pump that back to the plant for treatment. That needs to be updated. So there's some of the projects that we're working on. The additional parts of the rate increase are to cover some of the operational cost. Okay. Fuel, insurance, labor, those types of items. But a majority of that will be for capital improvements and planning projects. I didn't mention it, but our collection and distribution system needs to get into a regular pattern of being replaced. So going in and replacing sewer and water mains, putting in valves so they can be shut down or flow can be diverted. Those are things that we want to get on a schedule to make happen more regularly and improve our system's performance.
Okay. So with all of that said, will the rates go down once all these improvements are made?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We have been asked that question. The way those rates work is they typically are a calculation of cost over time. So the same material or process that was done 10 years later doesn't cost the same. So increasing those to keep up with those processes, but also sometimes we're going to issue debt for those improvements. We're not going to use as much debt as we normally would, so we're going to be fiscally responsible in that way. But those debt payments are going to be over, say, a 15 to 25 year period, and those rates will need to be in place to cover those debt payments over that period. Okay. So the short answer is we won't be lowering those rates, say, in 5 or 10 years when some of these capital improvements have been completed.
I think it's also important to note that while there's a big focus on the next 5 years, because that is part of what's driving this rate increase, this is part of a 20-year plan. When we engage Wester, we wanted to look longer term, and so we've got 20 years worth of projects that we're looking at. That's not part of this increase. We're focused on just the next 5 years, but there are long-term capital projects that we need to be focused on after this, next 5 years, after this kind of slate of projects are completed.
So has the town applied for any grants or matching funding to help with this?
Yeah, so we have always looked at grant funding opportunities. For everyone that heard, in March of 2021, the town did receive over $2.2 million from the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funds. A majority of those funds we're going to put back into the water and wastewater system. So ultimately that is keeping that rate lower. I kind of mentioned that in one of the other answers. Because we're using that cash and that cash influx that is coming from other sources, we're not having to charge our users for those costs. So we did apply for those, but we also applied for some state grants, and we were denied that. We found that out, I believe, at the end of the year in December. One of the reasons that we were denied, it was stated to us, is that our rates were significantly lower than many of the other communities that applied and were ultimately funded. Mm-hmm. Typically those grants are trying to help those systems that are struggling, even though they might have a higher rate in effect.
Okay. So with the increase, where does Speedway now compare to other communities?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think comparing ourselves to other communities is a good standard. It helps us understand really where we are. Prior to this rate increase or proposed rate increase, we were on the very low end of rates, specifically in Marion County, but also in the counties just near us. So with this rate, we compare favorably with communities like Beech Grove, Shelbyville on the east side, Plainfield on the west side. So we're definitely bringing ourselves more in line with those other communities. Okay. It is a little challenging to compare yourself to other communities because not every community has the same processes or the same system as we do. So that's something to keep in mind when you are comparing us to other communities. Understand they may be different than us. They may be higher because their processes are completely different, or lower because they don't have a wastewater plant or a big, large lift station that supplies outside residents. But even with that all said, we compare very favorably with the communities around us.
In an effort to control some of the rate increase, what has the town done with the existing financial structure?
We were fortunate in 2020 to be able to refinance all of our sewer debt. We had a little over $20 million of debt outstanding there, and rates were low during COVID. It made things more difficult to do, but due to action by the Federal Reserve, they were pushing rates down, and so we were able to get early consent to refinance our debt on the entire debt portfolio early, and that did a couple things. Number one, it's reduced our interest rate, and so we're saving a little over $90,000 a year in interest costs, which will be over $1 million over the life of the debt, and just saving interest costs. And then the other thing that it did for us, the debt that we had outstanding had a debt service reserve requirement as part of it of $2.1 million, which is really just cash that you have to set aside when you issue the debt. That kind of helps the bondholders who you're issuing the debt to just feel confident that if there's some revenue issues or anything at the utility, there's going to be money left aside to go ahead and keep making bond interest payments. And hopefully then eventually the utility catches up with revenue. But obviously that's just money sitting there that we're paying interest on. And so when we refinanced the debt, we were able to negotiate a letter of credit to meet that requirement instead of having cash to the side. So the refinancing, number one, reduced our interest costs, and number two, opened up cash that we're able to invest, and that's offsetting directly how much money we need to raise to do the projects that we're trying to do at the sewer plant.
So if this proposed rate increase goes into effect, when will the rate users start seeing this in their bills?
So the ordinance as drafted, the one that council heard on during the January 10th meeting, has the ordinance or the rate increase becoming effective on June 1st. Since we bill in arrears, so that means that users would consume the water in the month of June. They would see the bill then in July. The bill that they actually receive would get in July, and that would be due on August 10th.
So this is really good information. It's a lot of information to take in. Is there anything either of you would like to add additionally to maybe a question I did not ask you?
I think the one thing about rate increases is nobody wants to see them. I don't think that anyone wants to pay them. And I understand that. It's an additional cost on their monthly budgets. The reality, though, is if we don't do something with our plants, those problems aren't going to go away. And in fact, they're just going to worsen over time. So it's a matter of trying to be proactive, trying to get the rate increase approved so that we can receive those funds needed to be more proactive on some of this infrastructure improvement. We have a plan. We've put that plan before the council, and that has an associated rate increase. So once these things are done, I think that town staff is ready to move ahead with the planning, design, and ultimate construction of many of those improvements over the next year. I also think we're going to do a really good job trying to make sure our users understand what is happening with those projects. I don't want anyone to pay the rate and say, oh, I never saw anything get accomplished. We're going to work extra hard to communicate that through our Facebook, through our other social media accounts, as well as our town website, so that people can understand, oh, we're working on this project and that project, which will improve our water and our collection systems.
I just wanted to reiterate that, like Grant said, it is challenging to raise rates. We'd love to just keep going and try to make do, but we do get to the point where it's just we're cutting too many corners, we're putting too many band-aids on, and you really need to do the projects and do it the right way. As Grant mentioned, I look forward to publicizing that and working with you, Cheryl, to help people see. I mean, because some of the work, I mean, in a fenced-in plant somewhere. People aren't going to see that. They just know that they turn on the water and water comes out, and it's kind of just an expectation. But there is a lot of work. There's a lot of very smart, trained people that are working there, and then there's a lot of infrastructure that goes into it that's necessary to provide that and also treat our sewage. And the other thing I wanted to mention is we're not an investor in utility. This isn't a rate increase that goes to increase a profit margin somewhere or raise a dividend somewhere else. This is the community's utility. The town is the conduit through which we own these assets, and money that goes into it stays in the utility. And I just think it's important for people to kind of realize that that's how this is structured, and we're investing in their utility and these assets that help us create clean drinking water and treat sewage.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Jacob, for your time today. This was really helpful in letting me better understand the rate that we're looking at, the rate increase. If anyone has any additional questions, you're always welcome to reach out to either myself, to Grant, or to Jacob. If you follow the Facebook page or you check out the town website, there's frequently asked questions that we continually update, so that will answer a lot of your questions. Thank you.